The evidence for the claim that Nephilim will return in the last days seems strong, given the apparent parallel between Matthew 24 and Genesis 6. But the similarity is actually more surface than substance. Let's ask ourselves a question. If Jesus had wanted his listeners to think of Genesis 6, 1 through 4, or Matthew had wanted his readers to think of Genesis 6, 1 through 4, would it not make sense, wouldn't it be reasonable, that we would find quotations of Genesis 6, 1 through 4 in Matthew 24? Now you're probably wondering, why are you even asking? Isn't that what we just read? Doesn't Matthew quote Genesis 6, 2 in his marrying and giving in marriage line, giving us the context for the days of Noah in Matthew's Gospel? Well, it sure looks that way in English. The problem is that the New Testament wasn't written in English. It was written in Greek. And Matthew would be quite capable of quoting the Greek translation of the Old Testament, known as the Septuagint, if he wanted readers to think of Genesis 6, 1 through 4. That's what you would do. So that means we need to ask ourselves the question in a different way. If Jesus or Matthew wanted listeners and readers to think of Genesis 6, 2, and Matthew actually doesn't quote it, what do we have then? Now, I think it's perfectly reasonable, again, to defend the idea of Nephilim in the end times using Matthew 24, to expect a quotation. You wouldn't quote anything else if you were trying to make the point, and so if we don't have the quotation, we've got something else. Turns out all we need to do to know conclusively which direction this is going to go, does Matthew in fact quote the Greek translation of the Old Testament in his Greek gospel or not, it's very easy to find out. All we need to do is set side by side the Greek of Matthew 24 in the relevant places with the Greek of the Septuagint from Genesis 6, 1 through 4, right next to it. And this is what you're looking at on the screen. Whether you can read the Greek or not, you can actually see what the answer is. You can see the verdict. All you need to do is visually see if the words are the same. And you can visually see that, no, they're not. The Greek of Matthew 24 is different than the Greek of Genesis 6, 1 through 4. And the implication, therefore, is obvious. Matthew is not quoting Genesis 6, 2 when he gives us his marrying and giving in marriage line. And that should tell us that Matthew was not thinking of Genesis 6, 2 in what he wrote, because if he was, it would stand to reason that he would actually quote the passage. Consequently, Matthew 24, 36 through 39 isn't about a return of the Nephilim or a repetition of what happened in Genesis 6, 2.